me join us in welcoming Jay.
You know, I just want to make sure that everybody is here, means to be here. This is the last session of the first day before dinner, and we're talking about change. You're all sure you want to be in this room, right? Okay, good. Nobody's running off. You can sneak out later. That's fine. You know, change, the topic of change is a lot like the topic of Saskatchewan weather. We all complain about it, but nobody does anything about it. I've experienced a lot of change in my lifetime. I just celebrated my 62nd birthday, and you know, six decades of change. I've had quite an interesting and turbulent career and life, and you know what I've learned about change? I love it. I think it's fantastic. I'm just so excited when change happens, except when it starts to affect me. Isn't that interesting, eh? We all have an intellectual affirmation about change because we know intellectually it has to happen. We know from experience it's going to happen. But when it starts to encroach on our comfort zone, I'm not so sure we're that happy about it. Several years ago, quite a few years ago actually, I read a book. I don't remember the author's name, but the title I'll never forget, and it's simply Dinosaur Brain. And the thesis of the book is really all about understanding our primal self, our primal nature, and that default need to survive, to find comfort, to escape danger, to escape anything that's threatening at all, that fight or flight impulse. Because regardless of how evolved we think we are, regardless of how enlightened we think we are, whenever we get backed into a corner, that primal self, who's still alive and well, comes out. It's impossible to understand who we are today and how we function without being in tune with that primal self and knowing that drive to survive, that fight-flight impulse is still very much alive and well. And this is, in fact, one of the true conundrums of life. The very thing, do you know there's a term, it's called neophilia. It's a fear of anything new, which is really the fear of change, neophilia. So this displeasure, disgust, this hatred we have for change, which we resist as much as we can, is the same very thing that keeps us alive and has enabled us to survive all these centuries. Change is our subconscious response to the drive to survive. Yet when we sense change or when we become conscious of change, it clashes with that primal instinct, the fear of the unknown. At the primal level, we actively resist something we have little or no control over, and the very reason we have survived. Charles Darwin, he put forth a few theories of the history of and the origins of man. He understood some things, though. He said, "It is not the most intelligent, the most intellectual of the species that survives. It is not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is best able to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself." So really, it's all about adaptability, changing, both internally and in response to external change. King Whitney Jr. said, "Change has considerable psychological impact on the human mind. To the fearful, it is threatening because it means that things may get worse. To the hopeful, it is encouraging because things may get better. To the confident, it is inspiring because the challenge exists to make things better." To anticipate the day we stop changing is to anticipate our and our organization's death. Gail Sheehy wrote and taught that if we don't change, we don't grow. If we don't grow, we aren't really living. Reminded me of a cute little poem I came across some time ago. There was a very cautious man who never laughed or played. He never risked, he never tried. He never sang or prayed. And then on the day he passed away, his insurance was denied. For since he never really lived, they claimed he never really died. I'm sure his wife was happy about that. So I'm going to give you a really good definition of change. It is the constant pursuit of continuous improvement. The diligent and constant pursuit of continuous improvement. This means that in order to improve, we must change. If we are committed to improvement, we must also be committed to change. Some of you might be familiar with the works of John Maxwell. Very famous best-selling author and speaker and expert on leadership. He observed that change is inevitable. Growth is optional. And I think the key element there is whether or not we cooperate with change or whether we fight it all the way. So every healthy organization will either initiate or be impacted by change. I've worked in organizations where the response to change is to circle the wagons and pledge allegiance to the status quo. The interesting thing, however, is that change always finds a way to infiltrate the wagons and get into the organization. Some of us think we're in the eye of the storm, that all around us is this blizzard of change and all this noise and roar and confusion and mess, and we're protected in the eye of it, but that's a myth. We either learn to embrace it or it runs us over. One of my favorite lines is, sometimes it's better to direct the traffic in the way it's already going. You get run over far too less when that happens. And really, that's change. So the first thing I want to give you by way of a takeaway is something that I call culture of change. We approach change in two different ways. One is we see change as an event. As a matter of fact, I was part of a startup manufacturing organization back in the late 90s, early 2000s. This organization was growing very, very rapidly, very quickly. Went from selling product out of the back of somebody's half-ton to within 10 years having a dealership network of over all across the United States and Canada, well over 100 dealerships. You think we experienced some change? I'll tell you, we could have wrote the book on change. And somehow I found myself sitting in a meeting with representatives of Deloitte and Touche, a very excellent organization, and they were trying to sell us on a change management protocol. Now, I have no problem with change management protocols. Morris Interactive, we're in partnership with ProSci, which is an organization that specializes in change management consulting, and so on. So I don't have a problem with the system. But it really, really struck me as funny because they were talking to us about change as an event, and we were living in a culture of change. Change was happening around us some of it we were initiating, some of it was just invading our space. And it just seemed so funny and so excessively awkward to think of change as an event, because when it's an event, there's always a start and a stop, and a start and a stop, and a start and a stop. You ever pushed a car? You ever had a car, ran out of gas, pushed it? You don't want to stop once you get started, do you? You've heard of momentum. John Maxwell calls it the law of the big mo in his 21 irrefutable laws of leadership. The law of the big mo. Momentum. So you get it going, and it gets easier. you take advantage of the inertia that's created. So when we think of change as an event and we're starting and stopping and starting and stopping, we're completely denying the opportunity of momentum to kick in. The first thing you need to do to create a culture of change within your organization, whatever that means for you, is to stop talking about change and stop defining it as an event and start setting the expectation that, guess what, change is going to happen around here consistently. We kind of had a saying in the manufacturing company, and I'm sure you've heard this saying, it's a bit of a cliche these days, but the only thing that doesn't change around here is change itself. The only thing that doesn't change around here is change itself, the fact that we're changing all the time. So anybody who joined our organization knew that they were going to be living in a whirlwind of change. The change was going to be commonplace. It wasn't going to be the boogeyman that it tends to be when we think of it as an event, or a one of, or two of, or we're going to change this month, not next month, those types of things. We had truly a culture of change. And so because of that, change wasn't as threatening. It was just how we lived and how we functioned and how we did business. When we establish the expectation of change, people are never disappointed. If I go to my staff group and I say, guess what, we're going to change today. Oh, okay. That is business as usual? Yeah, pretty much business as usual. All right then. See, didn't give people a reason to start reacting as if it's the boogeyman, because it's not the boogeyman. So I'm going to share some experiences from the trenches, and working with change and working in conflict management, or what was it, Mike, what were you, the session before, was it conflict management? Yeah, yeah. There's an enormous amount of similarities. How many of you were in the conflict management one? Good half of you, probably a third of you at least. So there's a lot of similarities between change management and conflict management, because change triggers conflict. And the key to resolving conflict of any kind is to achieve understanding. Mac and I were chatting just a little bit before, and my experience with conflict management is that you will never resolve conflict if somebody has to be right and somebody has to be wrong. You will never resolve conflict if it's all about establishing the facts as you see it or as somebody else sees it. Conflict is resolved as you strive to achieve understanding. Funny thing happens when we understand each other, and I mean truly understand each other, is that we find that empathy starts to develop. Empathy is our ability to appreciate what each other is feeling and experiencing, what they're going through. Still doesn't mean we agree with them necessarily. Doesn't mean we like their position, but we understand, and so empathy develops. And the minute there's empathy, then we do gain an appreciation. And as soon as we have an appreciation for each other and each other's positions, we can find some middle ground to agree on, which isn't a lose-lose at all. So change management is very, very, very similar to that. And I think achieving understanding is probably one of the first obstacles we have to overcome. So resistance to change, let's talk about that first. Resistance to change takes quite a number of forms. You know, I've kind of likened the whole process of change to the stages of grief. Because the stages of grief, we're responding to some sense of loss. And the first stage of grief is denial, which is in fact the first stage or the first type of resistance we see to change. Now, I'm assuming that quite a number of you are in a position of influence, that you have some position of leadership. You may have staff working for you. You may work with teams, work teams. So what I'd like you to do as we go through these different ways that we see resistance to change and change initiatives is think about the group that you work most closely with and that you're most closely associated with during times of change and change initiatives. And And you may recognize some of the responses and some of the resistances to change. So denial is typically the first impulse to everything. Denial says this isn't really going to happen. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a normal, natural, primal response to somebody who's threatening our peace and security and our safe life in the cave. Okay, we deny it. It's not really going to happen. We're going to see ambivalence. Ambivalence is kind of like denial. Ambivalence says this may be happening, but I don't care. It won't affect me. So we may recognize it's happening around us, so we can't really deny it, but we don't care. Not going to affect me. That's ambivalence. Suspicion is one of the reactions to change. Suspicion is, I don't trust this thing. What's in it for them? We're going to come back to the what's in it for them phrase a little bit later. I don't trust this thing. What's in it for them? Cynicism. Cynicism says, here we go again, another flavor of the week. I worked in another, it seems like I've only worked in very entrepreneurial organizations. So if you weren't entrepreneurial, it wasn't much fun for you in these organizations. But I worked for a large group that was growing very, very rapidly. And the CEO of this organization, we think he had attention deficit disorder. He was definitely type capital A with a dose of ADD. Definitely an idea guy. He had no clue how to execute anything. But he was an idea guy. So he'd go to a conference. Don't be like him when you come back, go home from this conference. You're going to be loaded with ideas. Pace yourself, okay? He'd come back from a conference. Great new idea. The greatest thing we're going to do. New systems, new processes, new sales programs, whatever. And so he'd pull the executive team together and he'd pass it off to us. Cool, okay, let's do this thing. A week later, he'd read a book. He'd round us up. Great new thing, I've just read about blah, 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 blah. Let's do this. Okay, so we moved all the resources over here. Week later, watches a video, professional development video. Comes the executive team. Got a great idea. You should have seen what I just saw. Let's do this. We move all the resources over this way. By about the fourth or fifth time, we're starting to realize that some of these projects are contradicting themselves. We can't possibly be doing all of them. Although we tried initially. And apart from it being absolutely exhausting, the common attitude for the rank and file was, oh no, here we go again. Another flavor of the week idea. In some cases, flavor of the day. And you could just feel the cynicism. Now, all of these people that had become cynical, were they bad people? No, they were just normal people. We did that to them. We turned them into cynics by the flavor of the week agenda. Cynicism. Passive resistance. Passive resistance says they may want this to happen, but they're not getting my cooperation. I'll ignore it till it goes away. So our CEO friend that was specializing in flavor of the week change, I found that the passive resistance response was growing in the executive committee. Because he'd come back and it was all, let's all move all our resources here. And we go, yeah, not so quick. We'll wait a little bit. Week or two goes by and he completely forgot about that one because he's got a new one, you see. So we got smart. and we started to be passively resistant. We weren't going to jump and react very, immediately and channel all the resources this direction and that direction and that direction. So we found ourselves becoming passively resistant and ultimately had to be able to manage this guy. Acquiescence. Acquiescence says, I guess this is happening, so I'll go along with it. I don't want to make any waves. What's the least I can get away with? How many of you got teenagers or had them, survived them? I raised 3, lived to tell about it. Teenagers are the incarnation of acquiescence. When they finally agree to clean their room, after you've exercised all the leverage you have on them, you're threatening to ground them, to limit their internet time, whatever it took. Okay, I'll go clean my room. That's ambivalence. Or sorry, that's acquiescence. I'll do it simply because you got more strength than I've got. You have got what we call hard power. You have the opportunity to fire me if it's in a workplace setting. Passive-aggressive behaviors, don't you love those? It's another normal response to change. Passive-aggressive. I'm going to be miserable and drag my heels all the way. They will be sorry they started this change. They will be sorry they brought in this new initiative. I'm going to show them. Can you imagine what our workplaces would be like if there weren't any passive-aggressives? Boy, things would be wonderful. They'd all just be ambivalent and acquiescent. Another response is aggression and anger. Anger is aggression. It just doesn't always manifest as anger. But anger and aggression says, that's it, I'm pushing back. I'm going to complain. I'm going to give them a piece of my mind. Of course, we can never forget the response, the primal response, avoidance and flight. This is the last straw. I quit. Then really the final one, in my list at least, is rebellion. You know the rebels. I'm going to get a petition going. We're going to take a vote. I want my boss's head on a platter. We're revolting. That's rebellion. So in my experience in introducing change and bringing about change initiatives, I've observed all of these different types of responses. Not everybody, this is not like the stages of grief where you go through all the stages. Certain people will manifest certain behaviors and certain resistances, and others will have other ones, but it's what we watch for. You know, when I worked for these highly entrepreneurial organizations, and guess who we attracted? Entrepreneurial people. They loved it. We couldn't even call it organized chaos. It was just chaos. We didn't have enough time to get organized. And people that are like-minded, they love it. They were thriving in it. And yet what I observed was as we grew and developed and spread out and became more and more successful, we started to move away from the chaos and we started to become more systematic. We had processes and policies and structure and form and rules and methods and all these things. Guess what all the entrepreneurial people did? They went nuts. They eventually all quit. That was their response to the change that was happening, the change away from being entrepreneurial to the change away of being more systematic, if you will. So for change initiatives to take root, the people most directly impacted by the change must become the champions of the change. Change is typically a top-down initiative. And yet, It's all the people on the front lines. It's all the rank and file that really ultimately have to execute the change and then live with it and do the housekeeping of it. So often it's people in positions of leadership think, okay, I got this great brainchild of an idea, and we're going to pass it off now, and it's going to cascade down through the organizations, and by the time it hits to the front line, this group of people are going to be so excited. Not. They're really not excited because they haven't been part of it, so they haven't had an opportunity to share the excitement. So I'm going to share with you 5 or 6, I think there may be 7 or 8, a process here that happens with everybody when we're exposed to change. The first thing is we receive and we react. So I've already talked to you about how some people react. We initially react internally. So this change is going to happen. How many of you have been through a software conversion? Changing the entire ERP or MRP or whatever systems, operating system you use. Aren't they fun? Don't you just get excited about those? I've lost count of how many of those I've been through. And yeah. I never really believed in purgatory until I went through one of those and I understood what purgatory was all about. It was God punishing us to prepare us for heaven, right, in advance. Anyway, receiving and reacting. So upon hearing the news of imminent change, we react, usually internally. Our immediate response to change is greatly accented by our previous experiences. So we've been conditioned by previous experiences of change. And it's also greatly accented by the credibility of the leadership. You see, my illustration of my CEO colleague, he had lost credibility. So people didn't even break stride when he came with a new change initiative. It was like, oh yeah, whatever. That'll go away. We just ignore him and it'll go away, which it did for the most part. No credibility. You've likely noticed that when you inform your people of a change initiative, you generally don't see people jump out of their chairs with spontaneous applause and cheering, right? I've never seen that happen, actually. Processing is the next stage. So we've heard it, we've received the news, we've internally reacted to it, and really that's part of the processing stage. So processing is really overcoming our first reaction. Every individual processes differently. Some process faster than others. But we need to understand that if we're the change agents, if we're the ones that are initiating the change and expect other people to get on board, we have to recognize that the processing time that people have should not be interpreted as resistance or acceptance. People just need time to process something. Let me tell you how it typically plays out. Tell me if I'm wrong. So, the organization wants to do something significant change. So, let's say it's an IT conversion. We can all relate to those. So the leadership is meeting about this, and they're talking about the pros and cons and maybe doing some cost-benefit analysis and all that kind of egghead stuff that we do behind closed doors. And then we bring in the IT people because, you know, we need to know what they think, and they're going to do a lot of the footwork, so, you know, we need to consult with them. And we spend hours and hours and hours in a locked room behind closed doors talking about this. So as we come to the conclusion that we're going to do it, we get pretty excited because we've had an opportunity to talk about what a great thing this is going to be and how this is going to make things faster and better and cheaper, and it's going to improve everybody's life, and we're going to be able to do so much more with so little less. And we get pretty pumped about it. We've been talking about nothing else for weeks and weeks and weeks. So then we go and we round up the team. We bring them into a room. And we say, well, after much consideration and study and research, we've decided that we're gonna punt the old managing system, software system, and we're gonna institute a brand new one. It's an enterprise-wide system. Every user, which is everybody, will have a wonderful opportunity of participating in this. We give a name or so, and it's called this, and in our plan, we're probably going to use the next probably year to do the implementation, and there's customization work to do because no shelf product is good enough, meets all of our need. So we spend about half an hour, 45 minutes, and we say, okay, any questions? How many questions are there in your experience? I love you. Why? It's all due to the wave. Absolutely. You'd think leaders are smart, right? Why are they so stupid sometimes? You can't transfer excitement like that just by going blah, blah, blah. Right? Any questions? Well, no. So then, because we don't want to interpret it as hostility, we go away saying, that was easy, they're all on board. What? What are you drinking? They're not on board, they're processing. I was accused by my direct report, was the CEO of an organization, of being resistant to his ideas. He challenged me one day because I was having my weekly meeting with him or something like that, and he was talking about a whole bunch of things that he wanted to have happen, which is basically a bunch of stuff that I had to do. And so I'm listening and being polite and practicing my active listening skills. And he stopped talking, and I didn't start talking. It was silent. And I was probably scrunching up my face. You know what your face does when the gears start grinding inside there, I'm sure he was starting to smell burning clutch. My brain was working. And he says to me, I'm not sure I'm comfortable with what I'm feeling from you right now. I said, what are you feeling? He says, I think you're kind of resisting this. I said, no, I'm not resisting. It's the first time I'm hearing about it, though. I need some time to process it. Because the fact that you're handing it off to me is non-negotiable at this point. I'm pretty sure of that. So I'm getting this whether I like it or not. I'm about 2 steps ahead of you because I'm already starting to think about implementation. How am I going to execute this? And what strategy am I going to use now that you've passed this pile of junk to me and I have to take it to the rank and file? You see? So I learned something in that people need time to process. And simply because they're processing doesn't mean they're resisting. It doesn't mean they're being rebellious. It just means they need time to process it. Simply because there's no questions doesn't mean they disagree. It doesn't mean they agree either. Here's what you do. You give them the information session, and at the end of it, you tell them, we're going to come back in a week. Just for questions and answer. How many questions are you going to get a week from then? Lots. And what's the value of the people who are going to have to implement this? What's the value of them asking questions? They take ownership because they feel like they've been part of the process of acceptance and engineering and everything else. So they'll come back a week from then, they'll have lots of questions. And most of them will be really good. They'll always be, do we really have to do this? Because, I really like, my cave. I was actually part of this manufacturing organization. We had an MRP, so manufacturing resource planning software, which didn't come close to meeting our needs. So we went and did a huge project, and we were going to buy an ERP, an enterprise-wide system. And so we went to market, and we actually employed Deloitte & Touche to do the footwork for us. And so $50,000 later, they came and told us that well, this is the best product on the market for your purposes. It's tier 1, blah, blah, blah. Oh, by the way, it's going to be about $3 to $4 million once the dust settles. Once you buy the stuff and you implement it and you make all the changes and all the training and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, long story short, we decided to hire some programmers and we built our own. We actually called it ours. Our user resource system. Ours. It was great. But anyway, that's not what I'm talking about. So we were doing the changeover, and until then, some of our managers were using Excel spreadsheets to do a backup workaround on the MRP, which they found was less than reliable. And one of our best employees, I think he was the logistics manager or something, I can't remember now, but he had the most beautiful spreadsheets that he put all of his trust in, and he was not going to give up his spreadsheets. He just was not, because he didn't trust any other system but his own. And that was that odd occasion when we had to pull him aside and said, his name was Rod. Rod, you will do this or we'll have to fire you. Really? Yes. We had to have that conversation about 3 times before he finally figured out that he had to stop using his Excel spreadsheets, but that's a story for another day. So after receiving and reacting, the people process, they come to an understanding. Now, understanding is why we're doing this. What's the point? What's the merit in it? And whether you know it or not, whether you accept this or not, the onus of understanding is always on leadership. If you're in a position of leadership and you're the one that is promoting this change, the onus is on you that understanding be achieved. Once you've made the effort and people understand and they get a little bit of taste of what went on in that room with the locked doors, pre-project conversations, they say, oh, I get it now. I get it. I know why this thing is so important. Right? They don't necessarily have to agree with it. They might not like it, but they understand why it's so important, and they understand why it's so important for the organization. Right? We've achieved understanding. Unless we achieve understanding, there's no point in going any further with change management. That's the tipping point. The people need to understand. Then we go from understanding to accepting. Accepting just says, this thing is going to happen, so like it or not, I better get used to it. How bad can it be? How bad can it be? Well, it can be pretty bad sometimes. So they've understood, they've accepted, now they're going to become supporters of it. Since this thing is happening, I'm getting on board. See, that's the directing the traffic in the way it's already going. You want to run with the traffic, not against the traffic. So it's going to happen. I'm getting on board. I don't want to get run over by it. So might as well be part of it. Then we find that once they're supporting it and they understand and support it, they start to internalize it. And that's, this thing is great. How did we ever manage without it? This thing is great. How did we ever manage without it? And then the really pinnacle stage is when we become champions of it. We become promoters of it. This thing is so great, I need to tell everybody. And I need to encourage everybody to get on board. See, when that's happening, we've got momentum. Right? Once the people that we've passed this off to now have become champions of it, then we just get out of their way and let it happen. Because the momentum is happening, everything's moving, and everybody's on board. How's our time here? My timekeeper. We got, oh, it's 4 o'clock. Well, we go for a little bit yet here, eh? 4:30? Okay. Why do change initiatives flounder and fail? There's 2 main reasons. And the first reason is very rare. The first reason is simply, it was a bad idea. It was just a bad idea. bad ideas become obvious that they're bad ideas and nobody supports them in the short term, really. The main reason why change initiatives flounder and fail is leadership and a failure of leadership. I worked with a man, just a brilliant, very, very smart, very intelligent, very savvy young man, and he had started a number of businesses. He kind of had the Midas touch. Everything he touched turned to gold. And he had a bit of a habit. And it was a little bit uncharacteristic because he didn't wear a beard and he was quite young, but somebody would come into him with a problem. And he would stroke his non-existing beard and he would say, sounds to me like a leadership issue. I'm thinking he was right about 99.999% of the time. Sounds to me like a leadership issue. Because if you're in a position of leadership, the onus always come back to you. We're never in a position of blaming other people. Oh, they just wouldn't understand. Oh, they were just too resistant. Oh, they're just a miserable bunch. They prefer life in the cave, right? Nope. A leadership issue. First failure is to acknowledge and accept the fact of our primal response to change. See, if we come to our people expecting resistance, they won't disappoint us, right? Expect resistance. It doesn't mean they're bad people. It just means their primal nature is sticking its head out of the cave, right? Because you talk to them about change means that something has to stop, which is a sense of loss. Right? They're going to respond, and not necessarily with, oh, thank you, I've been waiting for this day. I'm just so excited for this new change. I love living in discomfort and uncertainty. Oh, thank you, boss. You're going to live a long time before you ever hear that response. They're going to resist. You're going to hear the gears grinding and smell the clutch burning as they think about it and respond to it. Understand that. If you don't understand it, you're going to start saying, oh, those bunch of people, they're blah, blah, blah. And you're going to vilify the very people that you depend upon to execute whatever change initiative you're bringing in. And the minute you start vilifying them, you start polarizing them. And the minute they start feeling polarized, you've lost their support entirely. And that change will become a millstone around your neck. Recognize that they will respond, take some time, and maybe somewhat primally. The second failure is a failure to prepare the ground. And that's what I mean when I talk about a culture of change. Make sure your people are hearing that, guess what? We've only just begun. We're going to change a lot around here. So get used to it, get comfortable with it. Part of the deficiency there is we tend to try and soften the blow with our people. So we use certain phrases. Maybe you've heard these before. Maybe you've heard these coming out of your own mouth. That's the last of the change. Everything will get back to normal. That's the last of it. We're done now. No more changes. Just do it. Just do it. I just need you to do this one more time. You'll wonder how we ever managed without it. This will be easy. No pain, no gain. Right? We go to our people and we make false promises. And we set ourselves up to be considered to be liars and hypocrites. Right? This last change. Don't be any more. Maybe not in your lifetime, because you're going to have a short life right away. Don't use those phrases on your people. Tell them, guess what? This is the first day of the rest of your life. Today will be accented by change. Tomorrow will be accented by change. The next day will be accented by change. Get used to it. Now, when you start to create that culture of change, it's that awareness and establishing people's expectation for them, it might create some attrition. What I mean by that is you might lose some people. But you know who you're going to lose? I have a good friend who lives about half an hour north of Saskatoon, and him and his wife, she was a good friend too, but they had an old 50-something Chevy truck. And that was just for use around. They lived in a small town and did a little farming and whatnot. Anyway, she had to get to town, get into Saskatoon for an emergency. The only thing that would work was the old truck. He had the car, and so she started it up and started driving. It wasn't going very fast, and it really seemed to be running warm, and it started to smell. She got to Saskatoon and realized the emergency brake was on the whole time. There wasn't much left of the emergency brake by the time. It was smoking pretty good, right? If there's some attrition, it'll probably be the emergency brakes of your organization. It's going to be the people that are going to resist you all the way anyway. It's going to be people that are going to be dragging their heels and constantly threatening your ability to be successful. So there may be some attrition, there may be some turnover. Some people just can't take it. In the same way, some of the entrepreneurs couldn't take the organization of the chaos. Certain cave people don't like change and anything that makes them uncomfortable. Another failure of leadership is failure to communicate. We really talked about that. Failure to achieve understanding. Remember that famous old line from Cool Hand Luke? What we got here is a failure to communicate. The onus is on the leadership to make sure understanding is there. And, oh, any questions, right? No, that won't work. We really can't proceed till everybody understands. Failure to allow time for fermentation, processing the information. We need people to think about it. They need time to digest. Smart people don't run a marathon after eating a big meal. So you've just given them a whole lot of stuff to think about. They're going to take some time to start picking up the momentum. Give them some time. It's not going to happen overnight. Failure to facilitate buy-in. That's the question and answer piece. You know, it's like choosing a melon. You need to look at it. You need to handle it. You need to squeeze it. You need to tap it. You need to smell it. Hopefully, you'll have a chance to bite it and taste it before you buy it. Give your people that same privilege. If you sell it to me before I'm ready, and I buy it because of the pressure, I will have buyer's remorse. Anybody bought a car that they wish they hadn't the day after? Just about everybody, right? That tells me that you were sold the vehicle, you didn't buy the vehicle. If we're sold an idea before we've had a chance to really buy it, we have buyer's remorse. We start regretting it. And when we start regretting it, we stop liking it. And the very thing that should have brought us joy now brings us contempt. Failure to delegate and empower, another leadership failure. Who's going to do what, when, how, and by when? Failure to delegate. Okay, great idea. Great, okay, we're going to do it. We spend millions of dollars on this change. Go do it. Right? There's no movement. You come back, well, how's that going? Well, we haven't started. Well, why not? Well, because we don't know who's going to do what, when, where, and by how, and how much money there is, and who's going to be responsible. No details. I worked with a man, he was a vice president of a manufacturing plant, and his people, his direct reports would come to me and they say, you know, we don't know how to work with this guy. I said, what's the problem? Well, we go to talk to him and he's got all these things that he wants us to do, but he's not a great communicator, so he's don't do what I'm telling you, do what I'm thinking. Don't do what I'm telling you to do what I'm thinking. They said, what do you do with that? I said, you can't do anything with that. You have to go back to him and say, what are you thinking about? You know, tell me what you see. What's the final product look like? Paint me some word pictures about the outcome, the product, whatever it is that you ultimately want to achieve. Give me a picture of that, and then I can do what you're thinking. So when we delegate and empower, we explain what the final product looks like, and then we assign the responsibilities. But we're just so excited about this, and we know that everybody else is so excited about it because they heard it half an hour ago, so I'm sure they're just going to, blast off and make this happen for me, right? Failure to follow up, lack of accountability. One of the signs of a Flavor of the Week initiative is when there's no accountability. You see, I'm not going to come to you next week to ask you how the last week's flavor was, because I've already forgotten about it. We started another one, right? So if there's an accountability structure established, you can be pretty sure that we're serious about this and we're going to make it happen. And failure to celebrate effort and success. If you're in a highly entrepreneurial organization or you're an entrepreneurial person yourself, you love new beginnings. We get really excited about starting stuff. We get really unexcited about maintenance. See, I like to create stuff and then pass it off because I want to create some more stuff. And I'm so excited to move on to the next thing that I'm not even going to stop to celebrate. But if we think that everybody else is like us, then we're going to fail in the opportunity to celebrate and actually just mark the time and say, well done, at stages, at the completion, whatever. So failure of leadership is a failure in celebration, and taking people for granted ultimately is what it is. I want to share another poem with you. And if Colton's back in time, we'll watch this final little clip. I don't know, the author is unknown. It's called My Comfort Zone. You may have come across this at some point. I used to have a comfort zone where I knew I couldn't fail. The same four walls of busy work were really more like a jail. I longed so much to do the things I'd never done before, but I stayed inside my comfort zone and paced the same old floor. I claimed to be so busy with the things inside my zone, but deep inside I longed for something special of my own. I couldn't let my life go by just watching others win. I held my breath and stepped outside and let the change begin. I took a step, and with new strength I'd never felt before, I kissed my comfort zone goodbye and closed and locked the door. If you were in a comfort zone, afraid to venture out, remember that all winners were, at one time, filled with doubt. A step or two and words of praise can make your dreams come true. Greet your new future with a smile. Success is there for you. We're going to watch this last little clip, and we'll take some questions at the end of the hour.
Okay, but it won't be as good as drugs. Once upon a time, there was a beautiful tiger. She lived in a cave with the rest of her family. Her father and mother told her, "You may go anywhere you want, but never go near the cliff, for you could fall
and die." Good story.
But when no one was looking, she'd go near the cliff. For the closer she came to the edge, the more she could hear, the more she could see, the more she could feel. Finally, she stood at the very edge. She saw a light. She leaned out to touch it. Then she slipped.
And she fell.
And she flew.
Where did she fly?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow?
A place with more suns in the sky than you can count.
It would be so bright.
A place not like today or yesterday. A place where things are better.
Tomorrow isn't a place. You can't see it.
Oh, yes. Yes, it is. I've seen it. That's where I'm going.
So obviously, we didn't have time to really get into the meat and potatoes of change management, but if you're interested, we can certainly hook you up with ProSci, which is the organization we're partnered with to help people with change management consulting, and we can do workshops and things like that. We've also got permission from, we have an association with the DISC people, which is a personality profiling. And they've given us 300 plus free profiles to give away. And so if you're interested, this is an online, just a quick questionnaire that you do, and it'll bring you back a wonderful report, and it'll tell you more about yourself than you knew about or even understood. So these are there for your taking it. You take one card and it gives you all the information that you need on going and profiling. One of the interesting things about this tool, if you use it with the organization, you will know very quickly who the people are in your work environment that are risk intolerant, that are going to be naturally an obstacle to any change initiative, things like that. It will identify whether or not you have people that are what their risk tolerance is, what their comfort level is, and things like that. So it's a good bit of insight into certain people and whether or not they're going to be supportive or highly resistant. So the ProSci thing uses the ADCAR change management model, if you're familiar with that. And Morris Interactive, that's all that we do, and more. So I'm going to open it up to questions here. The last thing I'm going to say to you, though, and I hope you take this away, the Achilles heel of every change initiative is people. It's not the program, it's not how much money you've got, it's not how much resource it's the people. Because I've never been part of a change initiative that doesn't at some point affect and influence people within your organization. It's going to touch them at some point at some level. And they're the Achilles heel. Because they're either going to make it work for you, make it successful for you, or they're going to prevent it from being a success, and you won't have that momentum. Who's the guy that's constantly rolling the boulder? Sisyphus? He's constantly rolling the boulder up the hill, right? That's what it's going to feel like every time you're doing change and you don't have your people on board. The Achilles heel of every change initiative is people. Make sure that they're the first consideration. You know, every organization that's successful, they have a can-do attitude. A can-do attitude. Let me introduce another element of that, the should-do element. Because if you're entrepreneurial, absolutely, we can do it. But should we? What's the collateral effect of this on the people and on the organization in general? Anyway, any questions?
My name's Tori. I'm from the town of Hafford. And working with peers of your own age, you have a lot of psychological reasons why people do what they do. But getting them to understand what they're doing is not a new idea. It's rehashing old new ideas. And they're actually a liability, and making them understand that, like, I'm not a risk taker. So, but what they've done has been done before and has failed. So skill sets for me to help them process and rethink the idea to make them understand it's not going to work, but it's an old idea that hasn't worked.
I'm not sure that's a question or a statement, but it works either way.
Skills to be able to deal with them.
The experts tell us that in order to introduce some change, we should connect it to something that's currently happening, something that people are currently comfortable with. Okay, so if I wanted to tell the Crudes that they're going to be moving into a motorhome, I have to tell them that it's just like a cave, but it's got wheels. You see? So you shroud the change initiative into something they're already familiar with. You create that point of reference. And it's not as scary then. See, it's change that comes out of the blue, that just, you know, has no connection to anything they're comfortable with. Connect it to something they're comfortable with, and make sure that something has created a positive experience for them. You know? So again, remember that people need us to tell them why they should be comfortable about this, knowing that they're not going to be automatically. So talk to them about something that, remember last time when we did this change, and yeah, it was a lot of work, and you know, but it was so great. Right? Build on the successes of previous change initiatives. Somehow make a connection back before we even start fleshing it out on what the new motorhome is going to look like and all the features it's going to have. It's the same as a cave, it's just better.